It started off like any other day. I was scrolling through my messages, checking for new subscribers on OnlyFans, replying to a few DMs here and there. It was just routine. But then I saw it, a message that stood out from the rest. We've been following your work. Interested in a bigger opportunity? We're casting for a new adult film series and think you'd be perfect. High pay, professional setup. Interested? I stared at the message for a while. It was from a company I'd never heard of, but the offer was tempting. The money I made on OnlyFans was good, but this sounded like the next level. And honestly, I was curious. Maybe it was time to take a bigger step in my career. I messaged them back. "What's the company?" I asked. "Where's the shoot?" They replied almost instantly. "Private production. We'll explain everything in person. We value discretion. Meet us at 9 p.m. Address attached." I hesitated. The address wasn't in a part of town I recognized, but something about the message felt professional, like they knew what they were doing. And I figured, what's the worst that could happen? I'd meet them, check it out, and if it felt off, I'd leave. Simple. I wish I'd trusted my gut. That night, I dressed carefully, not too flashy, but enough to look the part. I grabbed my phone, made sure my location was on, and even texted a friend the address just in case. Safety first, right? The drive took longer than I expected. The streets got quieter, the buildings older, more run down. By the time I reached the address, I realized I was deep in an industrial area, one of those places that feels abandoned after dark. The building itself looked ancient, its brick walls stained and cracked. A faded sign above the door had letters missing, making it impossible to read what it used to say. I almost turned back right then, but the promise of easy money and curiosity pushed me forward. I parked my car, took a deep breath, and walked up to the door. It creaked open before I even knocked. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, dressed in all black, his face shadowed under a hood. He didn't say a word, just stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. I hesitated. This is weird, I thought, but I told myself it was probably just part of the whole exclusive, private vibe. I stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind me. The inside was worse than the outside. The hallway was narrow, with peeling wallpaper and dim, flickering lights. The air was cold, damp, and smelled like something rotting. I followed the man down, my footsteps echoing louder than I liked. The silence felt heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. Finally, we reached a large room. There were cameras set up, old ones, the kind you'd see in horror movies. Tripods stood at awkward angles, and cords snaked across the floor. But it wasn't the equipment that made my skin crawl. It was the people. They stood in the shadows, their faces half hidden. But what I could see didn't look right. Their skin was pale, almost gray, like they hadn't seen sunlight in years. Their eyes were too wide, their smiles too stiff, like they were trying to mimic human expressions, but didn't quite get it right. One of them finally stepped forward. A woman, I think, though her features were distorted, like her face had been stretched and pulled. She spoke, but her voice was flat, unnatural. "We've been waiting for you." I tried to play it cool. "So, what's the role?" I asked, forcing a laugh. "You said something about a film series?" They didn't answer. Instead, the man who led me in gestured to a chair in the middle of the room, under a single harsh light. "Sit," he said. Something in his tone made it clear. It wasn't a request. I didn't want to sit. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave. But I also knew that if I ran, I might not make it out. So I played along. For now. I sat. They circled me, their eyes unblinking. The woman pulled out an old, dusty contract and placed it in front of me. "Sign," she said. I glanced at the paper. The text was blurry, like it had been photocopied 100 times. I couldn't read most of it, but the parts I could read didn't make sense. By signing, you consent to relinquish all bodily autonomy. You agree to participate in all productions, regardless of intent. I looked up at them, my heart racing. "This isn't right," I said. "I'm not signing this." For a moment, everything was silent. Then they laughed, but it wasn't a normal laugh. It was distorted, too loud, echoing in ways that made my skin crawl. The sound bounced off the walls, growing louder until it felt like the building itself was laughing at me. I stood up. "I'm leaving," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But when I turned toward the door, it was gone. Not closed. Gone. Where the door had been was now just a solid, blank wall. I spun around, my mind racing, but the room looked different. The walls were closing in, the lights flickering faster, casting strange, twisted shadows that didn't match the people in the room. And then they moved. Their bodies stretched and twisted in unnatural ways, like they were made of something else, something not human. Their faces melted into horrifying shapes, mouths opening too wide, eyes sinking into black pits. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I ran. The hallways twisted and changed behind me, doors appearing and disappearing, walls bending in impossible angles. I could hear them behind me, their distorted laughter following me, growing louder, closer. Finally, I saw a light, a faint glow at the end of the hall. I sprinted toward it, praying it was an exit. I didn't care where it led, as long as it got me out. I burst through the door and found myself outside. But it wasn't over. The building was gone. I was standing in the middle of an empty lot. No brick walls, no broken windows, just an open, barren space. The street was empty, silent, like nothing had ever been there. I stumbled down the road, eventually finding a gas station. The guy behind the counter gave me a weird look when I asked if he'd seen the building. "There's never been anything there," he said. I didn't argue. I just asked to use his phone and called a friend to pick me up. It was all seemed like a dream, but at the end, it was a reality that I can't escape. When I got home, I went straight to my OnlyFans messages. The offer was gone. The entire conversation wiped clean, like it never happened. But there was a new message from an account I didn't recognize. "Thanks for the audition. You were perfect." From that day, I left OnlyFans and never went back.
It started with boredom. Late night scrolling, mindlessly swiping through profiles on OnlyFans, looking for someone interesting. And then I found her. She was mesmerizing, long dark hair, piercing green eyes, and a mischievous smile that made it feel like she was looking straight into my soul. Unlike the usual models, her captions weren't just seductive, they were personal. It felt like she was talking only to me. We started chatting. At first it was the usual small talk, but then the conversations grew deeper. She wasn't just some online model. She was funny, intelligent, and strangely familiar, like I had known her from somewhere before. A week later, she asked me if I wanted to meet. No hesitation. I agreed. She chose the place, a quiet little town a few hours away. When I finally saw her in person, she was even more breathtaking than in the pictures. Perfect. Almost too perfect. We booked a hotel. Nothing fancy, but cozy enough. The moment we entered the room, something felt off. The air was heavy, the lights flickered slightly, and the TV turned on by itself. Just a glitch, I told myself. We laughed, we talked, and then at one point, I went to the bathroom. The moment I locked the door, the lights went out. Complete darkness. Then, knocking. Slow, rhythmic, directly outside the bathroom door. I called her name. No response. The knocking stopped, replaced by a faint whisper. It wasn't in English. It wasn't in any language I knew. I fumbled for my phone flashlight, turned it on, and slowly opened the door. The room was empty. No clothes, no bags, no sign of her. I checked the hallway. Nothing. The receptionist swore no one had checked in with me. My reservation had been for one person. Shaking, I pulled out my phone and went straight to her OnlyFans page. It didn't exist. No username, no messages, no trace of our conversations. I searched my emails, my texts. Everything was gone. I wasn't dreaming. I had met her. I had touched her. But somehow, she had never existed.
The first time I started my OnlyFans account, I didn't expect it to change my life in such a crazy way. I thought I was just taking a chance, maybe making some extra money. I had no idea how deep it would pull me into something darker. At first, everything was pretty normal. I uploaded pictures, videos, and occasionally had a few live streams. The money started rolling in, and it felt good to finally be doing something on my own. I had been stuck in a dead-end job for years before that. But being a content creator felt like freedom. I had the control. I had the audience. And the attention? It was more addictive than I ever expected. But then there was him. We met at a party, a random hookup that turned into something more. He was charming, funny, easy to talk to, and we clicked almost instantly. Everything seemed perfect at first. He always knew exactly what to say to make me feel special. When he told me about his job, his side business, I didn't think much of it. He was always so mysterious, which was part of his appeal. But something about it never sat right with me. I should have seen the warning signs, but I didn't. Maybe I was too blinded by everything else. Maybe I just wanted to believe he was the good guy he portrayed himself to be. It wasn't until a couple of months later, when we were already a full-fledged couple, that I noticed the odd things, little things at first, weird phone calls, strange texts at all hours of the night. He would leave his phone face down when we were together, something I never really thought twice about. But then one day, I found a bag in his car. It wasn't just any bag. It was heavy, filled with something I couldn't identify. I asked him about it, but he brushed it off, telling me it was nothing. Still, that feeling of unease grew, though I tried to ignore it. As the months went by, he seemed more and more distant, especially when it came to me. His affection was always there, but there was something missing, something off. But I wasn't ready to let go yet, not when everything seemed so perfect on the surface. I was in too deep to even think about leaving. Then came the trip. He told me it was a surprise, something for us to do together to celebrate the success I'd been having on OnlyFans. The way he looked at me when he suggested it felt like he was planning something big. I didn't know what, but it felt like I should go with it. The fact that he was always so persuasive made it easy to trust him. The promise of a getaway sounded like a dream. We drove out to this remote location, away from the noise of the city, surrounded by nothing but forests and long winding roads. He wouldn't tell me exactly where we were going, just that it was a surprise. I should have questioned it more, but I didn't. The further we went, the more my gut twisted with an unsettling feeling. My phone had no service, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being pulled into something much bigger than me. Eventually, we pulled up to a large, run-down warehouse on the outskirts of nowhere. The building looked abandoned, the windows cracked, the doors rusted. It seemed completely out of place, like something out of a horror movie. But he was smiling, trying to make me feel comfortable, so I followed him in. Inside, the place was huge and cold, with steel beams overhead and dirt everywhere. The sound of our footsteps echoed through the empty space. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew it wasn't what I imagined. The place had an eerie feel, like something was lurking in the corners, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. There were symbols drawn on the walls, strange writings I couldn't understand, and a sense of unease that crept up my spine. He led me to a small room in the back of the warehouse. The door creaked open, and I noticed something strange right away. Chains. There were chains on the walls, heavy and rusted, with locks that looked far too old to still be in use. And the smell, it hit me then. It was a mix of something metallic and rotting, like death itself had taken residence there. It was like a switch had flipped. His demeanor changed completely. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced with something darker, more dangerous. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't here for a romantic getaway. I wasn't here for a surprise at all. He wasn't my boyfriend anymore. He was something else, something evil. "You're not leaving," he said, his voice cold, the words like ice in the air. My heart raced, panic setting in as I realized just how wrong everything had gone. I took a step back, wanting to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I tried to reach for my phone, but it was useless. There was no signal. I was completely alone, trapped in this cold, desolate place with him. He laughed, a low, dark sound that echoed around the room. "You think you can escape? You're mine now." I didn't know what he meant by that, but I knew I had to get out. My mind was racing with thoughts of what could be happening, of what he might be planning. The warehouse felt like a prison, the walls closing in around me. He stepped closer, his face inches from mine, and I could feel his breath on my skin. But something snapped inside me. This wasn't who he was when we met. This wasn't the person I fell for. This was a monster, and I wasn't going to let him control me. I made a run for it. My feet hit the cold concrete, and I sprinted down the hallway, heart pounding, adrenaline rushing through my veins. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. The sound of his footsteps followed me, growing louder as he chased after me. But I didn't stop, not for a second. I rounded a corner, spotting a door in the distance, a single sliver of light cutting through the darkness. I reached it just as I heard him shout my name. I didn't look back. I threw the door open and ran out into the open air. But it wasn't over yet. I had no idea where I was, but I knew I needed help. I couldn't outrun him forever. Somehow, I managed to find my way to a nearby road, and I flagged down a car. The driver was hesitant, but I begged him to take me to the nearest police station. He finally agreed, and I didn't stop talking the entire way there, telling him everything. The more I spoke, the more I realized how insane it all sounded. No one would believe me if I didn't show them the warehouse, the chains, the symbols, but I had no choice. When we finally reached the police station, I told them everything, how I'd been lured into that place, how I had escaped, and how he had kept me captive there. At first, they didn't believe me, but when they went to the warehouse, they found everything I had described. They arrested him on the spot. It was only after everything settled down that I learned the truth about him, about his secret life. He had been involved in something much worse than I could have imagined. Drug dealing, cult activities, even darker things that I didn't want to know about. The warehouse wasn't just a hideout. It was a place where he conducted twisted rituals, and I had almost become a part of it. He was arrested, but the memories still haunt me. Every time I think of that night, I can't shake the feeling that I was this close to becoming one of his victims. The worst part? I had no idea. He had been lying to me all along. I stopped posting on OnlyFans for a while after that. It felt too risky, too dangerous. But eventually, I came back, knowing that I had to take back control. No one would ever use me like that again. The experience changed me, though. I wasn't the same person anymore, and I would never, ever let anyone take my freedom again. The memories will always stay with me, but I won't let them define me.